you had a great solution for the wrong problem. You made an excellent decision at the wrong time. Your decision led you in the right direction, but you didn't know what to do when you got there. These are the three commonest pitfalls that stand between you and a business decision. Avoid them, and you'll be a successful decision maker. A case in point. Newton Flint, president of our mythical firm of Metal Containers Incorporated. Flint remembers one particular decision as the most important of his career, and one on which the subsequent growth of Metal Containers was built.
I'd been president of Metal Containers for a little over a year. It was a fine old New England firm, but with limited growth. We had a whole new sales concept going, in keeping with what our competition was doing. In about 6 months, orders began to pour in. Then I started getting disturbing reports from my controller.
Sales figures are excellent, Mr. Flint, but production costs are skyrocketing.
I can't understand that. Materials about the same, and...
It's the overtime, Mr. Flint. It's all out of reason. The more business that comes in, the more the cost-to-income ratio jumps.
Newton Flint did see a lot to be desired in the manufacturing complex, and in fact, from the first time he saw the antiquated, cramped factory facilities, he itched for an excuse to update them.
It was only natural that I should see only one obvious solution to our problem, and that word, obvious, got me into trouble. For the next 2 months, nearly all of the executive effort of the company was turned toward plant expansion. We were all running around like rats in a maze, putting together an ambitious solution to the wrong problem. And finally, we found where we could get some money to do the job, and we had the plans for a very fine new wing to our manufacturing building. I took the package to the board of directors. The chairman had an answer for me in 3 days.
Newt, I'm afraid that the board can't approve your proposal. Now, first of all, you couldn't possibly get this expansion completed in time to arrest this dangerous trend. And in the second place, even if you could, well, the money commitment is too precarious. Newt, you're going to have to find another solution, and very soon.
Going back to my office, I felt pretty desperate. I remember gritting my teeth and saying aloud, that miserable overtime. And if I could end that, I could solve my problem. It just hit me all at once. I looked at the stacks of folders and drawings that represented our expansion plans and shook my head. What a stunning array of facts, and every bit of it completely meaningless.
Newton Flint called in his manager of manufacture, Art Hendricks, and asked him a question that had somehow never occurred to him in his thirst for expansion.
Art, you've been with this company quite a while. Why are we suddenly beset with all this overtime?
Well, mostly it's those new accounts, Mr. Flint. Nearly all of them require modifications from stock items. Modifications slow us down, and the sales commitments are for normal, routine deadlines.
And overtime is the only way that you can make it.
That's about the size of it.
Flint asked for a new set of facts that he had overlooked in the excitement of seeing new business come in. He talked to Ted Amos, the controller, Art Hendricks, and his sales vice president, Ken Belton.
Ted, I want you to run an analysis on how much more these modified items are costing us per unit. Art Hendricks can identify them for you. Art, check through all of the modification orders that you completed during the past 6 months. Find out if there are any that represent a fairly consistent demand, and see what it'll take to make these modified items a part of our regular line.
Well, as a matter of fact, I've been playing around with that idea. And there may be a half-dozen stock items that we haven't had a call for in years, and we can eliminate them entirely.
Ah, that's great. Now, you and Ken get together and see if he has any objection to dropping them from our catalog, and then convert those idle manufacturing areas to standardizing modified items that are moving well. Now, I really have a tough one for you, Ken.
Okay, you only die once. Shoot.
Your sales effort is outstripping manufacturing capability. Overtime is so great now that every new sale is a liability.
Why, expand, increase production. I thought that...
Easy, Ken. Now, we've tried that. It won't work. Now, here's what I want you to do. Screen all your accounts that are not up for production yet, and list those that will be important to our company's growth in the long run.
After Flint had all the appropriate facts at hand, he made his decision and called his staff together.
Now, first of all, we're adding these regular items to our catalog, and Art Hendricks has adjusted manufacturing processes accordingly to avoid overtime costs after we've cleaned up our current backlog. Ken has shown me strong evidence that there'll be a steady market for these new items. Ken and I have gone to the customers whose orders will require overtime in spite of these changes and told them that we simply cannot fill them in the time promised. We'll lose perhaps as many as half of these orders, and it may be a long time before we can hope to get them back, but it's a risk we have to take. Ken, do you have anything to add here?
Yes, the price schedule. Now, we still offer customizing, but on a realistic price schedule to accommodate overtime costs. In addition, I'll be screening those orders personally to make sure that we don't go overboard again.
Flint set up a program of monthly review of product versus demand. And in time, metal containers became one of the most successful in its field. And later, they did build the new factory wing. Like all successful decisions, that of Newton Flint followed a classic pattern. First, define the problem. Second, define your expectations. Third, develop effective solutions. Fourth, know what you're going to do with your decision when you reach it. There is creative thinking, and there is judicial thinking. When you're producing ideas, you're thinking creatively. When you're making decisions, you're thinking judicially. You cannot use both kinds of thinking at the same time. But is there some kind of signal to tell you exactly when to be decisive in your thinking? Yes, there is, and successful decision makers use it regularly. A case in point is Signal Broadcasting Company, in which top executives use the system of creative judicial thinking in reaching all major decisions. For example, there was the time when Signal Broadcasting bought another radio station. Harry Larkin, Signal's president, had a serious problem.
We bought our fifth radio station in a large metropolitan market from a company called Allied Communications. The station had a competent manager, but while we were waiting for approval of the sale by the Federal Communications Commission, this man resigned to take a job with another company. The owners asked the sales manager to assume interim duties of manager until such time as we took over. This put us in the difficult position of making a decision about selection of our key man. We were pretty much in the dark as to what our needs would be, since we'd not expected the problem to come up. I immediately called a meeting with Chet Hayes, our programming vice president, and Fred Wells, our sales vice president. And as I see it at this point, we simply don't have a general manager. Chet, this shouldn't affect programming too much, since you have a man ready to go into that slot.
Right. And he's well indoctrinated in our concept, as you know, and already working for us.
And Fred, when you get right down to it, this sales manager, John Bateman, the man we're talking about as a possible manager, has been sales manager there for nearly 5 years, and he was a salesman with them for 2 years before that.
He should certainly know his market, and sales figures I've seen looked pretty good. Very good when you consider how bad the programming has been.
There's one thing that bothers me. The former owners could have promoted him to general manager 4 years ago, but they brought in someone else from the outside. Why?
The National Program Director of Allied is an old friend of mine. I'll try to find out.
And I'll get our national sales reps to find out what they can about Bateman.
Good. Try to get as many as a half-dozen opinions as to his capabilities. As you know, gentlemen, while this sales approval is pending, the Federal Communications Commission's regulations prevent our approaching anyone at the station directly. So we'll have to develop all of our data second-hand. There's nothing to prevent my getting started with our project by meeting some of the city's leading citizens. It'll be good public relations, and while I'm at it, I'll see what they have to say about John Bateman.
Apparently, that was the reason he didn't get the general manager's job. He'd only been sales manager for about 6 months. Even so, he was very seriously considered.
The national sales reps seem to have a lot of respect for him. They say that he really knows his station and his market, and makes an excellent impression when he goes to New York to make calls.
I have some pluses on Bateman, too. He's very active in civic affairs, a real stem winder. Now, I also have information on 2 superior men in our own company and 3 recent applicants for management positions who look real good.
Enough creativity. There are a lot of ideas and facts assembled here. It's time to evaluate them and judicially find out which ones are needed. But it's impossible to evaluate the facts without clearly defining the problem. So the facts were tabled and the team went into creative gear.
We knew we had to make a decision about who would be our general manager, but we had to define our needs more closely. So we started compiling a list of all of the qualifications that we felt were worth considering.
High administrative capability, leadership, awareness of needs of the community, ability to accommodate new ideas enthusiastically.
A lot of that can be indoctrinated.
But knowing the market and getting the feel of the community takes a lot of working and living in a city.
Out of all of this discussion, the 3 executives developed a pretty good profile of the man who would be ideal for the job, judicially eliminating all items of relatively minor importance.
At the top of the list, stability, professional experience, experience in the market, desire, adaptability, administrative capability, drive, leadership.
The next step was for the 3 executives to determine the alternatives available to them.
Bateman certainly has the time in the business, but we don't know whether or not he wants the job. Besides, his entire background is in sales.
Then why didn't he turn down the interim manager's job? And what is it that any good sales manager ever wants but a general manager's job? And what's so bad about a background in sales?
A rigid application of priorities, capability, desire, knowledge of the market, community identification gave a strong edge to the incumbent, John Bateman.
But selection wasn't the end of our decision-making. We shifted into creative freewheeling again to come up with a raw list of criteria for judging Bateman, and in fact, all of our managers on performance. We also made a special list of areas in which Bateman might initially need help from our headquarters staff. And it worked. Bateman today is one of our most valuable executives.
Most important of all, each step of the way, Larkin and his staff shifted into a posture of judicial thinking, applying critical judgment to their creative efforts. Their disciplined actions were truly made on the basis of a combination of both creative and judicial thinking, but each is practiced separate from the other. As John Larkin says,
Sure, both creative and judicial thinking go into the decision, but doing them jointly is like turning on hot and cold water faucets at the same time. You always wind up with lukewarm decisions and mediocre results.
you are listening to a computer card sort, organizing data, manipulating facts to determine relationships, weighing relationships to determine decisions.
At the foot of the ladder, and step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up.
This kind of statistical decision-making helped to put men on the moon. But to a surprising degree, the same orderly process is available to almost everyone. In a sense, it's a new way to improve decisions, but it utilizes an old, compact, convenient package called the human brain. Carl Herwig, divisional sales manager of an instructional materials company, makes it work for him and his staff on a daily basis.
Our company sells educational motion pictures and film strips to elementary and secondary schools. Each salesman has a territory that goes at least 150 miles in every direction from his home base. For instance, Edna Carnes in the southern region might phone in to say...
Going to Central City Monday, Carl. They really ought to preview our materials. There are some good orders in that market, and I want them.
Good, Edna. You're probably right. It never has been covered except by mail.
It's a doggone far, Carl. You must hate to get tied up that long. I'll be gone overnight, and I don't really know what I'll have to show for it.
Well, can't you make some other calls coming and going?
Oh, sure. Darby County's on the way, and so is Wrightsville and the Instructional Materials Center at Mid-State College, but, oh, Darby's a dud.
Yeah, I remember. Too rich for federal help and too poor to spend their own money.
And Mid-State's order is in for the year, so it'll be just a courtesy call. Wrightsville's a possibility, but I don't know. You never...
2 days on a speculative call, which nevertheless needs to be made. This was the point at which the inefficiency of call selection in his division was bad decision-making, and things began to fall into place in his mind that were to make a big difference in his division's productivity and sales costs.
Generally, statistical decision-making involves 4 steps. First, defining the problem in detail. Second, putting a value on the factors. Third, manipulating factors to determine relationships. And fourth, weighing relationships to determine the decision. I called all 3 salesmen into the home office for a 5-day sales workshop. First, I explained what I had in mind to the 3 salesmen. Ed Hannon, as usual, spoke up first.
You mean you want us to come up with all of the factors that make a worthwhile prospect?
Right, Ed.
Well, the first one is, does he have any budget for the things we have to sell?
Edna?
Well, are they using the kind of things we have to sell?
Good. Now, one from you, Jake.
What's the overall instructional materials budget, and how much is federal funding? Carl Herwig and his 3 salesmen kept it up until they had a list of 10 strong qualifying items for a good prospect. A list which not only included financial potentials, but costs of doing business, like amount of service required and distance traveled to service the account.
Budgets had been published for most of the major school districts, and I got them from the state departments of education. Our next effort was to put numbers on the facts. It was a little hard to get ourselves around to putting numerical values on our estimates, but well, we finally managed. On the basis of a suggestion made by Jake Evans, who loved this system of evaluating decision factors.
Why don't we shoot for a 10-point day for openers?
Well, I think I follow you, but explain it, Jake.
Well, we have all these qualifications for a good prospect, like how much money he has, whether he's in the market for our films, how far he is from home base, how long he takes to process our materials before purchase, and so on. Let's each make a list of 50 prospects in our own territories, and based on the information we have, well, score them for quality.
You mean like rate them from 1 to 5 for budget, appropriateness, and so on?
That's right. And then each district has a numerical rating, and every day we make the calls we make add up to 10 or more. The figure being the total of the rating points.
Now you're right on target, except let's not get hung up on the figure 10. I'd like to try out some of these in each territory and see how each one works out.
As it turned out, 15 was the figure that Carl used. In other words, if the points assigned to each school district called on each week by a salesman add up to 75, he could consider that he had put in a good week.
As time went on, we added factors like callbacks, service calls, and combination calls. These naturally came about as we gained more experience using our system. The important thing was that in every case, the totaling on points by a salesman in planning his week's activities always resulted in a decision followed by action, and, incidentally, a marked increase in sales productivity.
Statistical decision-making can be applied not only to the most complex business, but to the simplest aspects of everyday life that require decisions. Remember, first, to define your problem in detail, then put a value, a numerical value, on each factor involved. Manipulate the factors to determine relationships by rank or by percentages. Finally, weigh the relationships and make your decision.
Put your back in it, you bowsy scut. Heave and haul. Heave and haul. Heave and haul. Or I'll cut you to shark bait with this hook.
The bucko mate on a windjammer 150 years ago didn't care much about opinions of the crew. He saw that the job got done. A far cry from the way important life and death decisions are made today.
The limb Right about now.
Easy, point 3, 7.6.
Roger, copy. Echo, decimal 3, and...
In important undertakings of high purpose, high acceptance of decisions by the people who have to carry them out is more often than not absolutely essential. Even at an everyday level, decision-making becomes a lot simpler when you realize that it has two distinct ingredients.
Quality.
All of the aspects of decision-making that deal in facts and rely on experience and judgment.
Acceptance.
All of the aspects of decision-making that deal in how much the people who have to carry out the decision like it and believe in it. Unlike the quarterdeck decisions of the sailing master of a blue water down Easter, most of today's decisions, to be successful, must maintain a mixture of standards of quality and acceptance to fit the decision to the needs.
But how do you get both at the same time?
Actually, you must classify your problem first in terms of the more important objective, quality or acceptance. Seldom will the same degree of quality or acceptance be found in the same decision. Philip Treadwell, president of a book publishing company, is typically faced with decisions based on quality and acceptance. Here are three examples.
One of the biggest items purchased for our company is paper. Now, there are all kinds of opinions about paper among those who use it. Our purchasing agent has his opinion.
This paper rates higher on our specification requirements, and it's offered at the most competitive rates.
Our director of manufacturing has another. All that purchasing needs is that watermark on the paper, and it's okay by them. Well, why don't we try another supplier for a change, just to keep them competitive? And so it goes. The printers have their preferences, and our sales division may or may not agree. Now, I back our purchasing manager because he's doing his job, doing it well. No matter what he buys, there'll be those who disagree, but his decision is based on rigid company standards, which are constantly being reviewed and revised to fit current requirements. The price is right, and there are no manufacturing or sales problems involved.
Obviously, this is a decision in which acceptance by the people who use the paper is relatively unimportant. Standards of quality and judgment on which the decision is based rank high. Here's another example from Phil Treadwell.
We have a large company cafeteria on the premises because our entire operation, including offices, is located far from any convenient, decent place to eat. The caterer who contracts this service developed a serious problem.
Mr. Treadwell, I'm afraid we won't want to renew our contract next year. We're not getting enough patronage to keep us going.
Well, the place seems to be pretty well filled every day.
Oh, they come in all right, but they either just buy our sandwiches, soup, and beverages, or bring their own, or...
Well, come to think of it, soup and sandwiches, all I eat.
And our contract calls for a hot meal menu, too.
Oh, wait a minute. That hot meal menu, can't you do something to make it more interesting?
Not at our top contract price of 75 cents per item.
Well, work up what do you think would be an acceptable menu at the lowest possible prices. And I'm going to have each department elect a representative to come to a meeting with you and tell you just what they want.
The duly elected representatives met with Treadwell and the president of the catering company and went over the menus and made suggestions. The caterer found most of the menu ideas feasible, and the employees showed their willingness to pay more to get what they wanted. Quality was required, but it was required to meet the goal of acceptance. And the last example.
In our company, we're constantly probing for ideas at all levels, so I guess that none of our decisions is made without some consideration of acceptance by the people who have to get the job done. And of course, in a lot of cases, acceptance and quality are equal factors in decision-making. But I remember one particular major decision I made recently which really needed acceptance by everyone from the board of directors right down to the building maintenance crews. But it also represented a major change in direction in which we had little choice. As our personnel directors...
I just can't see any way that we're going to make anyone like a change that is obviously a first step to automation.
Well, I really don't expect them to like it, but I must have their cooperation. It's going to be a long, slow process. And I'm going to need some of these old-timers to help us do it.
Then why not just tell them that? This company is a big, important slice of their lives. They quite rightfully feel that they're entitled to know what's going on.
He was proven to be right. Before we made our first move, I called a meeting of union representatives and most of our senior employees in the printing and manufacturing division. and I laid it out to them. So we're all faced with a decision. Not just Philip Treadwell and the board of directors, but every man and woman who has the interest of this company at heart. All of the facts have been explained to you. They're explained in the brochures that you have, including how the job protection plan would work. I want you to take them home, study them, discuss them with other people in the company, and then a month from today, we'll meet again and find out what you think.
It would have been foolish to expect absolute unanimity on a question of phasing into automated printing processes, beginning with changes of whole lines from gravure. But, on the other hand, the very life of the company was at stake. And no one would be thrown out of work who had devoted 2 years or more of his life to the company. Others could be retained or given ample time to find something else.
There was grumbling, of course, and the move represented change, and that's always a low item on any acceptance list. But by and large, they bought it, and we got over the change smoothly and with gratifying enthusiasm. I was criticized by one or two members of the board for going to the employees with the problem, but you see, we couldn't solve it without them.
Success in making decisions is assured by fitting them to the specific needs of quality and acceptance. Sometimes the hour of decision, like the dawn in Mandalay, can come up like thunder. It can begin like this in the boardroom of your company. The weekly executive committee is breaking up, and Anson Parks, the president, calls to his manufacturing vice president.
Oh, Stradley!
Yes, AP.
I can't emphasize too much how important it is that your department resolve those expensive bottlenecks without delay. Can you check with your shipping clerk, Mason, and his boss, Turnbull, to see what can be done? Frankly, right now it is the difference between profit and breaking even. Now, before you know it, it will be the difference between profit and loss. As I look out of this boardroom, or my office at this magnificent view, those rolling hills and patches of woodland, somehow, I don't want this to happen.
And obviously the problem lies somewhere between your shipping and receiving department, Mason, and your production department, Turnbull. It's getting to the point where this downtime in production plus overtime...
Our downtime in production is always a matter of waiting for materials from Mason's shipping and receiving
And
boys.
the unbelievable traffic tie-ups with trucks at the west end of the building, and Mason's shipping and receiving literally choked with bottlenecks, and the worst overtime record in the company. It's downright embarrassing to face, AP. I tell you, you're going to have to shape this up somehow between you. It's the difference between profit and loss in this company.
Sorry, young fella, but I just couldn't take the rap for you. But you can understand, I'm sure, it's your problem.
Oh, all too well, Mr. Turnbull. I've known it for a long time. And the bigger and better business is, the worse the problem. Somehow I've got to solve it. Somehow I'm going to solve it.
Look, Mason, here's a tip. Why not get Stradley to bring in a consultant? He's big on consultants, and this'll get the heat off you. Save you from a lot of painful worry and decision-making.
For the rest of the week, Mason fretted over the problem. He sat up late at night reading periodical articles on time and motion studies and plant design. That weekend, he was in his attic poring over old college textbooks when his wife, Mildred, interrupted him.
Willard?
Yes, Mill?
Honey, you're working yourself into a state over something, and I've never seen you like this before. I thought maybe we could discuss...
No sweat, really, Mill. You see, I'm faced with my first major decision after 3 years on the job. And, well, I'm kind of out of practice. Just making sure I know exactly what the problem is.
Well, can't you just call in an efficiency expert or something?
Funny thing, that's what Turnbull suggested. It would be an easy out, and I think he'd probably come up with the same answer that I have. But they never get around to doing anything about it, and we'd still have the problem.
Well, isn't there any way? I think you'd better get up a new resume and...
Mill,
and maybe
there are other ways. And if I can't find a solution without copping out, I'm not going to be much good to anyone, no matter where I work. I've got two things going for me. I'm capable of solving the problem, and I have a strong desire to find a direct solution.
A direct solution?
Yes. Calling in an efficiency expert would not be a direct solution. It would just get me off the hook for a while. Same way with a plan I worked out to warehouse supplies at the upper end of the assembly line. Stradley will buy it, so will Turnbull. And it might work for a year. But with the way business is expanding, we'd wind up with the same old mess and nowhere to go. No, Mill, I need something that'll really solve the problem. And I think I've got it. You see, the real problem is not just in how we're doing things, but in poor flow of materials. And the big problem is to get them to move the executive offices to the front of the building where space is wasted. Then we'll solve our overtime problem, our profit problem, and have all kinds of room for factory expansion.
Willard Mason, for a man who had not made any big decisions, was doing very well. He had accurately sized up the problem as being the one-ended flow of materials to finished product, not simply a matter of moving things around in a factory. The sensible thing would be to separate receiving from shipping at the west end of the building and move receiving activities to the east end where the assembly lines began. Mason's biggest problem, as he saw it, was a sacred cow in a tradition-ridden company. But he had an idea that was worth a try. He took it to Mr. Stradley, his boss.
You see, this is the diagram of a plant somewhere else. Maybe it's Iowa.
All right.
Anyway, receiving is at the left, here, by the beginning of the assembly line, and shipping is over at the right.
Yeah.
Now, they're moving their executive offices and boardroom where their receiving is.
Right.
And moving receiving up next to shipping.
Now, wait a minute, Willard. How come they don't put their executive offices in the front of the building? They'll mess up their whole operation. Willard, you young scoundrel. That's our plant in that diagram.
Well, sir, it does look a lot like it.
I want you in AP's office in an hour, ready to go through your routine, just the way you did it for me. I think you've solved the problem.
Willard Mason became the young man to watch in his company because he did everything he could to boost his decision-making ability. He was perceptive and honest with himself in sizing up the problems, willing and determined to find a real, direct solution no matter how tempting an easy way out might have been. He recognized that his authority was limited in dealing with the problem, so he had to sell his immediate boss first to give his position some muscle. Finally, to do all of this, he had to find an interesting way to get his solution adopted. The secret of Willard Mason's boosting his decision-making ability was really summed up in a story Winston Churchill tells of the meetings with President Roosevelt and advisors, and how Harry Hopkins would get to the root of things.
Hopkins would say, "Surely, Mr. President, here is the point we've got to settle. Are we going to face it or not? Faced, it always was, and being faced was conquered."
In the words of the prophet, behold the camel, a horse created by a committee.
Groupthink. Friend or foe to decision. Like any good tool, it can be dangerous to the user, can mar good workmanship, or even self-destruct.
Okay, that'll do it, Frank. Gentlemen, you've seen a demonstration of 3 prototype high-speed cordless quarter-inch drills designed for use in industry or by the home craftsman. We're probably going to adopt one to our line, unless there are serious reasons why we shouldn't. Now, I'd like your opinion.
Well, as far as I can tell, certainly. I don't know if I would know it.
Come on now, there must be some opinions.
Well,
Miss Benson, as our home economist, suppose you started off. As you know, the idea is to merchandise this item to women as well as men.
Yes, well, I really don't know. It's such a new idea. I think they're all real cute, though.
Dennis, have you studied the specs and design on this one?
well, I have looked them over, Mr. Hartzell.
Which one looks good to you from a manufacturing standpoint?
Well, we can tool up for any one of them without too much trouble, I guess. Just whatever you decide.
How about merchandising, Novak? That's going to be very important.
Oh, we could work any one of them into our regular line. No real problem.
No real problem. Well, let's not anyone upset the boat with wild and exciting thoughts. Look, we're all kind of new to each other. At least I'm new to you. I'm going to leave you for a while to kick this around. I'll be back in a little bit to get your thoughts. I'd recently been made president of an electric home appliance company. We had access to patents on 3 cordless electric drills. The question was whether we should get into this field. I needed a lot of facts and ideas from the people who'd be making this item, advertising it, marketing it. But the facts just weren't coming. The chairman of the board had given me a clue to some of the problems I might encounter. My predecessor's downfall had been a series of bad decisions.
Hartzell, your predecessor was the victim of an overpowering penchant for groupthink. He had committees making decisions, and, well, everything he did was not the result of decisiveness, but a kind of, well, consensus compromise. What's more, they're scared to open their mouth.
The scars of battle by consensus were everywhere. These people were so conditioned to being fall guys for bad decisions by their former president that it was impossible to get any kind of information from them, as I found out when I returned to the meeting. Novak was the spokesman.
Yes. We have an opinion for you, Mr. Hartzell. We believe, with some reservations, of course, that model number 3 might be worth a try.
Might be worth a try. Well, what seemed to be wrong with the other 2? And why the reservations about number 3? Does that mean that there are serious drawbacks to all 3? Let's hear about them.
No, Mr. Hartzell. Nothing like that. It's just the way that the vote came out.
Vote? I don't seem to follow you.
Well, we took a vote on which item we should go with, and the majority went for number 3. It was 3-2, with 1 abstaining.
No opinions at all?
Oh, no, certainly not. It was a secret ballot.
Well, I'll be. Look, let's start again. I don't know exactly how things worked in the past, but there's a new regime here. Perhaps I'd better explain some things. First of all, as president of this company, I'll make all the decisions on matters of general company concern, like major departures from established lines. I'll ask you to provide me with all of the facts and ideas within the realm of your area of responsibility, all of them that you can. And I'll evaluate what you have to tell me. Just provide me with all of the suggestions that you can from your store of expertise. Now, let's try again. Go back to your offices and develop everything you can in your area of responsibility, pro and con, about these 3 drills. Don't throw anything away. We'll have another session at 11 on Monday, and be sure to give Miss Holt your lunch order as you go out. And bring your bad ideas, too. Some may be pretty good.
The next session at 11 Monday morning was a lot better. There was a lot of data brought forth and some opinions as to problems which could be expected in manufacturing, purchasing, merchandising, consumer interest, advertising, and cost versus pricing. Hartzell was very pleased with the results and told them so.
I want to thank all of you for the contributions you've made. We've discarded a lot of ideas.
Yes, I was beginning to wonder why I'd been asked.
Well, you scored one big stimulating idea on how to make our drill attractive to women.
Oh,
To say nothing of the idea about pitching this to men as the gift for her. Whatever drill goes, that's definitely part of our program.
And even the ideas we discarded were useful, because it gave us options and perspective. Now, I have the job of discarding some more to reach a decision. Dennis, if you'll stay for a few minutes to talk some more about that packaging equipment that you'll need.
Yes, it sounded very exciting.
Certainly.
It's very good.
Well, I think now we...
Now, let's hear about the equipment.
Well, there are 3 suppliers who can provide us with what we want, and purchasing has gotten bids from them.
Do you like their product?
Well, their specs are satisfactory, and Mr. Cole in purchasing says they're all okay.
Mr. Cole?
Uh-huh.
Has he had experience in this line?
No, but he sees all the salesmen and approves all of the orders, and also he's...
Forget Cole and all that. Are you satisfied that these vendors will do the job?
Well, Mr. Cole is an experienced purchasing manager, and I...
Jingle, jangle, jingle.
Pardon?
I was just thinking about sending a cowboy to buy aerodynamic equipment. Now, what equipment do you want?
Well, to tell the truth, there's a company in Chicago who had an exhibit at the convention last year, and I'd like to look into what they have to offer. Now, I know a couple of people who are using it, and I'd like to talk to them.
That's the spirit. But watch your costs and have Cole do the bargaining. He's good at it, I understand.
The little drill for ladies, as it was called, was immensely successful, and there were bonuses for everyone who contributed. But the biggest bonus of all for the company, Hartzell, and the employees was learning how to group think safely as a tool. Hartzell hammered away at these 5 rules.
Don't let the group decide. Don't consult cowboys about aerodynamics. Reward ideas. Know how many cooks spoil the broth. Cash in on plus values of group participation.
Faites vos jeux, mesdames et messieurs. Faites vos jeux.
Would you base your business decisions on the turn of the wheel of fortune? Or a roll of the dice? Or a cut of the cards? Certainly not, you say. But nevertheless, there's a good chance, if you'll excuse the expression, that you take big risks in your business decisions regularly. Risks you really should not take. Recent tests conducted by the University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins University, the Naval Research Laboratory, and Harvard University's Laboratory of Social Relations and MIT's School of Industrial Management indicated that some of the most stable business people were prone to take 5 kinds of risks. Perhaps you'll recognize some of the people yourself. Perhaps you'll even see yourself. Take Charlie Renshaw, for example. He's in product development, and he has 3 very solid projects that need his constant attention. They're all pretty sure to develop into something profitable for the company. Yet, Charlie breezed in one morning.
Irma, cancel everything for today.
But, Mr. Renshaw, you have to go over those figures with Mr. White on developing that new logic board. And you know that if that control panel for the washer-dryer is put off for another week, Mr. Fulton will...
I know, Irma, I know. Mr. Fulton will have a cut-glass bicycle.
Yes, sir.
But just think, Irma, a device to control weightlessness. I'll be gone overnight to Boston. And just think of the possibilities of this.
What possibilities?
Ideas, Irma. Exciting new ideas.
According to researchers, people are inclined to put too much value on long shots and too little on short shots. If you're like Charlie, you spend a lot of time chasing rainbows.
Mr. Haversham, do I have the man for the job?
You mean for that expediter slot?
Yeah.
Good. Which one of our lads did you select?
Oh, he's not one of our people. It's an applicant who mailed in his resume. Saw him yesterday.
Is that his resume there?
Yeah.
Let me look at it.
Tom Tidwell is talking to his boss, Henry Haversham, about filling a key position. On Haversham's desk is another resume.
Well, he looks pretty good. I have another resume right here, and I'd like you to look this over.
Oh, sure, Mr. Haversham, but it'll have to go a long way to beat my man. Wow, look at those educational credentials. 5 years in just the background we're looking for. Say, what? This man's already working for me.
Yes. Yes, he is. When will you ever learn, Tom? You made a good decision when you hired this man, and we know what he can do. We're not gambling. What's more, he deserves a promotion. Tom, sometimes you go as wild as a man betting horses about things like this.
The researchers say that people prefer to make risky choices even where safe choices exist. How many Tom Tidwells do you know? Or is he a kindred spirit? The merchandising vice president of a paint company called in one of his most experienced people recently and gave him the job of developing a whole new concept for an exciting new product. Bill Carson, one of the company's most experienced men in this line, called on his vice president to protest.
But, Mr. K, I've worked hard to move up in this company. And although I have made my share of mistakes, I have the experience and savvy that this job needs. Now, Harry's a good man, and with more experience, he'll be great. But
Bill, everything you say is true, especially about the mistakes. Now, this assignment demands a great deal of attention to detail. An inexperienced man is going to be very, very careful of each step he takes. Now, you've been doing this so long, you sometimes forget to touch the bases on the way around. We can't afford to make that kind of mistake.
I guess I do take too many shortcuts. But it always seems to work out.
But someday it won't. Then we'll all be in trouble. Now slow down a little, Bill. Don't take so many risks.
The studies on risk-taking indicate that in selecting a subordinate to run a new project, the person with the greatest knowledge of the subject may not always be the best choice. Even the most experienced individual needs a spot check now and then. And it wouldn't hurt to check yourself every so often. The head of a lab equipment manufacturing company does with startling results.
Seeing those research test results made me face up to a mistake that I've made over and over. I'm a pretty good executive, I think, but when I start making a new item and it looks like a flop, I just can't seem to decide to discontinue. I usually pour money into advertising and promotion instead.
It's just human nature for people to take larger risks when they start falling behind. Just about all of us have done it, but at business we just don't seem to recognize this weakness and come up with some pretty disastrous decisions as a consequence. But there's an even more curious tendency to take risks than that. We've all seen it happen, and studies bear it out. How many times have we heard a business associate say,
Dick Riley. Haven't seen Dick in some time. Went broke, you know.
Oh, not enough money behind that new business of his, huh?
Oh, he had plenty of money, but I guess he wasn't careful enough with it. You know how circumspect he was with money when he worked for the company.
Yeah.
Well, he was almost like a Jekyll and Hyde when he went on his own. Just kind of went off his rocker in the way he spent.
Yeah, it's funny how that seems to happen to a lot of men. Remember old Harry Spencer? Did the same thing. I went to his funeral the other day.
Testers again proved what many of us have noticed. The emotional tension of being in business for yourself after years of working for someone else often generates a wildness that overwhelms the most deep-seated caution. If you're going to cut the risks in your own decisions, remember these men and remember them often.
I'm Charlie Renshaw. I put too much value on the long shots and forget the sure short shots.
I'm Tom Tidwell. I take risks when I have the option of making safe decisions.
I prefer to remain anonymous as a reformed sinner, but for a long time I just couldn't keep myself from taking bigger and bigger risks as I fell farther and farther behind.
I'm Dick Riley. If I ever get back on my feet again, I hope I have a chance to be as careful of my own money as I was of the other guys.
There's one voice that's missing. Your voice. In taking risks, unnecessary risks, in making important decisions, just where do you stand?
Faites vos jeux, mesdames et messieurs. Faites vos jeux.
When you're worried or in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout.
It's easy to confuse activity with productive motion. And when you find out that you've just been spinning your wheels, often it's too late. It's one thing to make a decision or to find a solution. It's another thing to make it work. The secret is
Effective follow-through.
there's no magic formula for effective follow-through because each set of circumstances makes its own demands. But there are 5 guiding principles that will keep you moving forward on your follow-through, productively and efficiently. Examine, if you will, the case of Sam Ford, who a few years ago was a young assistant purchasing agent of a firm in Virginia, which produced automated valve systems for heavy industry. Sam was ambitious, young, and in a hurry. But let him tell the story.
In the most casual way, I learned that one of our biggest suppliers was going out of business, and I made quite a hero of myself by negotiating for their entire stock of an automated system and all spare parts at a real steal. The president of our company, Donald Cobb, a man of quick emotional reaction, was really pleased.
Sam, I'm happy with what you've done. Mighty happy. I especially like the idea of selling parts to our competitors' customers. Ought to pay for the whole transaction. Yes, sirree.
I'd talked to shipping and receiving about warehousing, and they told me that they'd have some space opening up, and, well, just for the fun of it, I checked out other warehousing that might be available in the area when I was making the deal, because I didn't know that we would have the space. I just took it for granted that everything was set. Well, I kept putting off going through the formalities of reserving the space until one day I got a phone call.
Is this Sam Ford?
Yes, it is.
Tom Phillips here. Everything's wrapped up. Your shipment went on 4 vans today. Should reach you in 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days? Well, I don't even have a place... Look, Tom, hold up on that, will you? I need a little more time to get things ready.
Get ready for what? Sam, if you don't want this shipment, I have plenty of places I can set it at a better deal than I made with your company. Well, how about it, Sam? Sam?
No, Tom. No, we'll be ready. Somehow.
Well, well. Sam Ford, the boy wonder. The bright young man who bought a warehouse full of stuff and doesn't have any place to put it.
But Mr. Cobb, shipping and receiving said
They
that...
said nothing because you didn't follow through and reserve that space. And now it's being used for something else. Now, my boy, unless you can see a better way out of this than I can, you're not going to have to worry about finding warehouse space. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a place to hang your hat.
I can tell you, I was down in the mouth, really ready to quit, give up, get a job as a janitor somewhere. But something, I don't know what it was, something made me hang on. And then I remembered that I had an alternative. I rushed to the phone and called the company down the street that had said they had some space to rent 3 months ago.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ford, but that space has long since been leased. All we have is a kind of a shed.
Hold it. I'll take it.
But, Mr. Ford, it only has 1/3 of the space you say that you need.
I was back in the ball game again. I took the smaller space and hustled around for a couple of days, persuading people to move things around, doubling up, until I had what I needed. Fortunately, the shipment was a couple of days late in arriving, and although it was going to cost a little more, even Mr. Cobb conceded that we still had a very good deal.
Ford, I can't say much for your follow-through, but you certainly have imagination and determination, and I guess you're worth saving.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now, Sam, I'm getting too old to go through the kind of rat race you subjected this company to during the past week. And I'm going to make sure you learned a lesson.
Oh, I have, Mr. Cobb. I have indeed.
Oh, you don't want it to ever happen again. I realize that. But I want to be sure you know how to get action from the decisions you make. First of all, did you have a plan?
Well, I had a pretty good general idea.
Not enough. You must have a plan of exactly what you're going to do. When, who will help you, every important detail. Now, one of 2 things that saved your neck was that you at least knew where there might be some other space, right?
Right, sir.
So in addition to any plan, you must have a series of alternatives, second choices, that'll bail you out if your plan goes awry. Now, Sam, what do you think was your biggest error in all this?
Well, locking up the deal on getting the space. Now, if I'd had that, there'd have been no problem.
Exactly. First, you took for granted that you had the space, when you had no right to make that assumption. So put this down in the book as the most important rule of all. Take nothing for granted. The 2 most dangerous words in business are, I assumed. And another important rule, don't put anything off because the deadline isn't near. Now, Sam, repeat the 5 basic principles to stabilize and control successful follow-through.
Take nothing for granted, start with a plan, have alternatives, act promptly, and, well, Mr. Cobb, we only talked about 4.
Right. I don't think we have to discuss the other one. You may not know it, but you have it pretty well built into you.
Sir?
You don't give up easily.
Sam Ford still doesn't give up easily. And he's organized his system for follow-through so that it's as much a part of his day as breathing. In the business world, where results count, it is not just the brilliant man with great ideas who succeeds. It's the man with great ideas who knows how to follow through.